The pitcher slipped from her hands at exactly the wrong second, and half a liter of ice water went straight down the front of the most expensive suit in Providence. Adeline Marsh was 27 years old, a cardiac nurse at St. Ambrose Mercy Hospital, and she'd been on her feet since the night before. She hadn't seen him standing there. Nobody had warned her that the 6th floor had gone quiet for a reason. 4 men in dark coats turned at once. Behind the nurse's station, somebody stopped breathing, and Adeline looked up into the face of Elias Corvino, 34 years old, the man whose name people in this city said carefully or didn't say at all, and she knew she'd just made the worst mistake of a very bad year. He didn't shout. That was the strange part. He looked down at the water spreading across his chest, then back at her, and he didn't say a word, while the hospital administrator came running down the hall to fire her right there, in front of every patient, every nurse, every open door. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She unclipped her badge, set it on the counter, and walked toward the elevator with her chin up, because Adeline Marsh had learned a long time ago that begging never once put food on her table. But she didn't make it to the elevator, because Elias Corvino, who hadn't spoken since the moment the water hit him, finally did. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her hands, and the question he asked her, quietly, in a hallway where nobody dared move, was the last question anyone in that building expected to hear from a man like him. 7 words. That's all it was. 7 words, and neither of their lives would ever look the same again. If stories about second chances and the quiet strength of ordinary people mean something to you, give this video a like, share it with someone who could use a little hope today, and subscribe so you never miss what we bring you next. Now let's go back to that hallway on the 6th floor, and to the 7 words that changed everything, he asked, his voice no louder than the heart monitor sounding from a nearby hospital room. Why are your hands shaking like that? Adeline stopped in the middle of the hallway, only a few steps from the elevator doors. She had prepared herself for shouting, for threats, for anything a man like him might throw at her back. She hadn't prepared for a question, and she certainly hadn't prepared for him to ask it, in the voice of someone who genuinely wanted to hear the answer. She turned around. The entire 6th floor was still frozen in place, no one daring to breathe too loudly, no one daring to step out from their doorway. Adeline looked down at her hands, saw that they were still trembling slightly, then clenched them and hid them inside the pockets of her lab coat. Because I'm tired, she said. People's hands shake when they're tired. There's nothing mysterious about it. Elias didn't take his eyes off her. That's not an answer. That's the only answer I owe you. Her voice wasn't loud, didn't break, and carried none of the desperation people usually heard from someone who had just lost her job. I spilled water on your jacket. I apologized. If you want me to reimburse you, send me the bill, and I'll pay it off little by little. But my hands aren't your concern. Warren Ashcroft, the hospital's executive director, chose that exact moment to step in. He was still breathing hard from running down the hallway, and his voice had gone soft and pliant with the effort to calm the situation. Mr. Corvino, I sincerely apologize. She's already been dismissed. This will never happen again. We'll take care of the cost of your jacket, of course. And I assure you that the staff on this floor will be reminded from the beginning about. Elias didn't turn his head. He said only one sentence, short and even, without emphasizing a single word. Are you planning to make me listen to that entire list, or are you going to let her answer me? Ashcroft fell silent at once. His mouth was still slightly open, but no other sound came out. He stepped back half a pace, his arms hanging at his sides, and for those few seconds he seemed visibly smaller. Adeline watched it happen, and something very strange rose in her chest. Not satisfaction, but a kind of exhaustion deeper than exhaustion itself. She had worked through the entire night. She had covered a shift for a coworker whose young child had a fever. She had been on her feet from before dawn, until the sun came up, and was now nearly going down again. And now the most powerful man in the city was asking her a question no one in this building had ever asked. What do you want to hear? She said, and this time her voice was softer. Do you want to hear that I'm suffering? That something is wrong in my life? Everyone here has something wrong. If you stand in this hallway long enough, you'll hear 100 stories worse than mine, from people who have far less time left than I do. She pulled one hand from her coat pocket and pointed toward the row of patient rooms. Over there. That's where you should be asking questions. Not here. Then she turned away. She pressed the elevator button. The doors opened almost immediately, and she stepped inside, her back straight, without looking at anyone again. The doors closed, and she disappeared behind the dull steel. No one on the 6th floor moved. Winifred Doyle, the head nurse, stood behind the nurse's station, with one hand resting on the desk phone without dialing a number. Ashcroft rubbed his palm against the leg of his trousers. 4 men in dark coats waited for a nod that never came. Because Elias Corvino wasn't watching the elevator. He was looking down at the floor, at the exact square of tile beneath his feet, about an arm's length from the wall with the window, where the puddle of ice water still spread across the surface and slowly seeped into the grout. He stared at it for a very long time, far longer than any puddle of water required. Nico Valero stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Do you want to go home and change? The car is waiting downstairs in the lobby." Elias didn't answer. He remained standing there in the middle of the hallway, in the middle of a building he could have bought outright in a single afternoon, and for one brief moment, anyone observant enough might have noticed that the man didn't look like a boss at all. He looked like someone who had just remembered something he had spent a very long time trying to forget. The notice was still taped there when she got home, right in the middle of the peeling wooden door of the 3rd-floor apartment, the edges of the paper curling slightly from the dampness in the hallway. Adeline didn't read it again. She had already read it enough times to know every line by heart, enough times to know exactly how many days were left before someone came knocking and told the 2 sisters they had to leave. She pulled the notice down, folded it into quarters, slipped it into her coat pocket the way she had done with the ones before it, then smoothed her hair, composed her face, and unlocked the door. The apartment was dark, with only the desk lamp in the corner of the living room still glowing. Juniper lay on her side on the couch, the blanket pulled up to her chin, one arm hidden beneath it. She was 19 years old, her hair tied back hastily, and she had come home from dialysis that afternoon. Those sessions always took something out of her that required the whole next day to get back. "You're home," June said without opening her eyes. "Yeah." Adeline hung her coat on the hook. "Have you eaten? I waited for you." "I told you not to wait." "I know." Adeline went into the kitchen, opened the cupboard, and stared inside longer than she needed to. There was a box of pasta, half a packet of powdered cheese, and a few eggs. She took everything out, set a pot on the stove, and while she waited for the water to boil, she washed 2 bowls in the sink with cold water, because the water heater had been broken since before Christmas. She cooked the pasta, beat 2 eggs into it for a little extra protein, sprinkled the powdered cheese over the top, then carried the bowls to the table. June sat up slowly, bracing one hand against the couch, and moved into her usual seat. The 2 sisters ate with the refrigerator humming in the corner of the kitchen. "How was the hospital today?" June asked. Adeline lifted a spoonful of pasta and blew on it to cool it. "Normal," she said. "Long shift, crowded, but normal." She heard her own voice and noticed how natural it sounded, how smooth, and it made her feel slightly sick. She had become so practiced at lying to her sister that she no longer had to think before she did it. June didn't answer right away. She ate a few more bites, then set down her spoon and looked at her sister. Really looked at her. Long enough that Adeline finally had to lift her eyes. "Addie," June said, "the walls in this place are really thin." Adeline went still. "The night before last," June continued, her voice very calm, "you went into the bathroom and turned the water on as loud as it would go. You stood in there for almost half an hour. I was lying out here, and I heard everything." Adeline set her spoon down on the table. She meant to say something, some excuse, something gentle that would steer the conversation somewhere else, but no sentence would come out of her mouth. "I'm not asking because I want you to explain," June said. "I just want you to know that I know. Because I hate feeling like you have to put on an act for me. I'm sick, not stupid." In the apartment next door, someone turned on the television, and the faint voice of a host drifted through the wall. Adeline looked down at her bowl of pasta. "I just don't want you to worry," she said. "I already worry," June replied. "I've been worried for a long time. Whether you hide things or not, I still worry. The difference is that when you hide them, I have to worry alone." Adeline didn't know how to answer. She stood, carried her bowl to the sink, turned on the faucet, and as she bent down to wash it, the collar of her lab coat slipped slightly, and the right side of the fabric shifted upward. June caught sight of it. Her eyes stopped for less than a breath on the area beneath her sister's right ribs, then immediately moved somewhere else. just as they had moved away hundreds of times over all those years. Neither sister said anything about it. They never did. "Addie," June said after a while. Adeline turned off the faucet. "Yeah? I'm sorry." Adeline turned around. "Sorry for what?" "For being sick," June said. She said it plainly, the way someone might talk about the weather, as though it were an obvious fact she had accepted long ago and was now simply putting into words. "If it weren't for me, you could have left already. You could have gone anywhere. I know what you've given up. Just because I don't say it doesn't mean I don't count." Adeline stood there with both hands still wet and felt something break very quickly behind her eyes. She turned her face away, all the way toward the window, and remained that way until she was certain her voice wouldn't betray her. "Don't you ever apologize to me for that again," she said to the dark pane of glass. "Do you hear me, June? Don't ever." The next morning, the door to Warren Ashcroft's office opened without a knock. His secretary shot to her feet, then sat back down, her eyes fixed on the surface of her desk. Ashcroft was holding the telephone receiver, and he lowered it in the middle of a sentence without even saying goodbye to the person on the other end. Elias Corvino walked in. Nico Valero remained outside the door. "Mr. Corvino." Ashcroft stood so quickly that his chair scraped backward across the wooden floor. "Please, have a seat. I was just about to call your office this morning about what happened yesterday. I truly—" Elias didn't sit. He walked to the window and stood there looking down at the parking lot below, both hands clasped behind his back. Ashcroft remained standing. There were 3 people in the room, and neither of the other 2 dared look directly at him. The secretary had already slipped outside. Ashcroft stared into the empty space between Elias's shoulder and the window frame, the kind of gaze a man learned after years of practice. "Your jacket," he said. "We'll take care of everything. I've already contacted the tailor in Boston," they said. "I didn't come here because of the jacket." Ashcroft closed his mouth. Elias still had his back to him. "Mr. Ashcroft," he said, his voice as even as though they were discussing the weather. "The funding my family provides for this hospital's cardiology department comes up for renewal in March." "Yes." Ashcroft's voice went dry. "Yes, that's right, March. Do you think it should be renewed?" The question fell into the middle of the room and stayed there. Elias didn't turn around. He didn't emphasize a single word, didn't threaten anyone, didn't mention any condition. He only asked. And Ashcroft, who had sat in that chair long enough to understand that men like Elias Corvino never gave orders, stood frozen for several seconds before realizing that this wasn't a question about money. Sweat gathered along his hairline. Of course I think it should be renewed." "You do?" "Yes, very much." Elias turned around. "Yesterday you fired a nurse in the 6th floor hallway, in front of your patients, in front of everyone lying behind those doors, people who tomorrow morning will have to place their lives in the hands of the staff members left on that shift." Ashcroft opened his mouth. Elias continued, still without raising his voice. "I don't care what she did. I care that you did it there, in that way, and you did it so quickly that I believe you'd wanted to do it before yesterday." "You were only waiting for an excuse." Ashcroft didn't answer. "Now I'll ask you again," Elias said. "Do you think that funding should be renewed?" Ashcroft reached for the telephone receiver. He dialed the internal number for human resources right there, in front of Elias, and his voice rose half an octave above normal as he spoke into the phone. He talked about rescinding the decision, restoring her position in full, reimbursing the lost shift, and making sure the call was placed that morning, not that afternoon. By the time he put the receiver down, Elias had already reached the door. "Mr. Corvino," Ashcroft called after him. "May I ask who is she to you?" Elias stopped with one hand on the doorknob, and for a moment he genuinely considered the question. "No one," he said. Then he left. That evening, in the study of the estate, Nico came in still holding his phone and delivered a single sentence. The hospital had called her twice that day, and both times she had refused. Elias didn't ask why. He only sat there for a long time after Nico left, and in all the years he had spent running everything he had ever run, he couldn't remember the last time someone had told him no. He didn't ask why, but before Nico reached the door, he asked another question, and it contained only 3 words. "What's her name?" Nico answered. Then Nico left, and before that evening was over, he returned to the study carrying a file in his hand. It was thin. That was the first thing Elias noticed. An entire life, reduced to only that many pages. Nico placed it on the desk, slid it toward him, then stepped back and stood with his hands clasped as usual. "Everything you need to know," he said. "There's more if you want it, but I think this is enough." Elias opened it. The first page was a copy of her hospital personnel record, complete with an identification, photograph, and signature. The second was the death certificates of her parents, several years apart. Her mother had died first, her father later, and on the line listing the cause of her father's death were the words, "complications following transplant surgery." Elias read that line, stopped, then turned the page. The third page was a summary of her debts. Not consumer debt, not credit cards, not a mortgage. Every dollar of it was medical bills, a figure that had accumulated over years, had been sold to a debt collection company, then sold again, and every time it changed hands, it grew a little larger. The fourth page contained the medical records of her younger sister, Juniper Marsh, 19 years old, end-stage kidney failure, dialysis 3 times a week, her name on the regional transplant center's waiting list. The fifth page was a copy of the eviction notice posted on the door of the third-floor apartment. The sixth was a brief document, only a few lines, about a man named Holloway who had once been engaged to her and had ended the engagement around the same time the debt total on the third page began climbing sharply. Elias turned to the final page. It was an attendance record. Nico had already circled the last line in pencil. Since the day Adeline Marsh began working, she hadn't taken a single day of leave. No sick days, no holidays. Some weeks she had taken extra shifts to cover for other people. Elias read the line. Then he read it again. Then he didn't turn another page because there was nothing left to turn, and he remained sitting there with one finger resting on the penciled circle, while the clock in the study struck several times. Nico waited. Then he said, carefully, in the way of someone who had walked beside Elias long enough to be permitted to speak, "You're wasting time." Elias didn't look up. "There are people at the harbor waiting for your answer," Nico continued. "You've moved 3 appointments to next week. Uncle Salvatore is still lying in that hospital, and the doctors still haven't managed to tell us anything useful. And this," he said, tipping his chin slightly toward the file, "this is a nurse. Someone you met once in a hallway. Someone who spilled water on your jacket, and then told you not to interfere in her life." Elias closed the file. He placed both hands on the cover. "You've read this, haven't you? I put it together. Then tell me, in all those pages, what do you see?" Nico shrugged. "I see a file." "There," Elias said. He looked up, and beneath the desk lamp his eyes appeared more tired than usual. "You call it a file. I call it a person slowly dying while no one notices. Read that last line again. Never took a single day off. Do you know how afraid someone has to be before they don't even dare to get sick?" Nico didn't answer. "And notice this," Elias continued, tapping one finger against the cover. "In a few hours, you and I learned more about her life than anyone who stood beside her for all those years in that hospital. Doesn't something about that seem terribly wrong to you?" Nico remained silent. He saw it. He just wasn't sure whether what was wrong belonged to the hospital or to the room in which the two of them were standing. 2 days later, there was a knock on the door of the third-floor apartment after dark. Adeline opened it and stopped short. Elias Corvino stood in the hallway alone, without Nico, without anyone waiting at the top of the stairs. He wore a dark coat and looked so out of place against the stained plaster walls and the flickering light overhead that it was almost absurd. "Miss Marsh, how did you find my apartment?" She didn't open the door any wider. He didn't answer that question. He only said, "I'm asking for 5 minutes." From inside the apartment, June called out and asked who it was. Adeline said it was someone from her old job, then stepped into the hallway, pulled the door closed behind her, and stood facing him. She was still wearing an old sweater, her hair tied crookedly to one side, and she looked at him with the expression of someone who had no energy left for politeness. "Talk." Elias reached inside his coat, took out an envelope, and held it toward her. Adeline didn't take it. She looked at the envelope, then at his face, and pushed it gently but firmly back toward his chest. "No, you don't know what's inside." "I do," she said. "And you know I do." She folded her arms. "Listen to me once and then let it go. Your money will run out. It always does. I pay the rent, I pay the hospital bills, I buy medicine, and 2 months later it's gone. Then I'm still me, standing in this same place, in this same hallway. Except now I owe you too, and you're not the kind of man anyone wants to owe." Elias lowered his hand. He put the envelope away. All right, he said. Then I'll say what I came here to say in the first place. I didn't come to give you money. I came to hire you. Adeline said nothing. My uncle had a stroke, he said. He's out of immediate danger, but he can't feed himself. He can't speak clearly, and he won't stay in any kind of facility. I need a private duty nurse, full-time. The contract will be through the company, with health insurance, paid time off, and a salary stated clearly in writing. The hallway stayed silent for a long time. Somewhere downstairs, a door closed. Adeline looked at him, and this time she really looked, not with the defensive stare she had worn a moment earlier, but with the look of someone weighing something very heavy in her hands. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, she said. If you answer honestly, I'll consider it. If you dodge even one, I go back inside. Ask. Is this job legal? Yes, he said. From beginning to end. You're a nurse. You care for a patient, you keep records, and you report to his treating physician. Nothing else. Will I have to hide anything? From anyone. Anyone at all. He didn't answer immediately, and that half-beat of hesitation made her trust him more than an instant answer would have. Not about your work, he said. You won't have to lie to anyone about anything you do, but you'll be working inside my house. You'll hear things that have nothing to do with you. I'm not asking you to conceal them. I'm only asking you not to repeat them. If that counts as hiding something to you, then count the answer as yes. Adeline gave a very slight nod. Last question. Can I quit whenever I want? Whenever you want, he said. No notice. No explanation. You put the key on the table and walk out the door. No one will stop you. No one will come looking for you, and you'll be paid in full for everything you've already worked. That's easy for you to say. I know, he said. So I'll put it in the contract. You'll read it, you'll see it there, and then you'll decide. Adeline turned her face away. She looked down the dark staircase, and what filled her mind wasn't the envelope, wasn't him, wasn't pride or dignity. It was 2 words. Health insurance. It was the waiting list with her sister's name on it, and the things the doctor had told her the last time about what the file needed to show in order for June to remain in active status. It was the night before, when June had sat at the table and apologized for being sick. She stood there so long that Elias thought she wasn't going to answer. I'll take it, she said. Then she turned back, and her voice hardened. But listen carefully. I'm not taking this job because of you. I'm not taking it because you were kind to me in that hallway. And I'm not taking it because I owe you gratitude. I'm taking it because my sister needs that insurance card. That's all. You pay me, I do my job, and there is nothing more between us than that. Elias looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. 7 o'clock Monday morning. There'll be a car waiting for you at the end of the street. I can get there myself. Then get there yourself. He turned and started down the stairs, and Adeline remained in the hallway until she could no longer hear his footsteps. On Monday morning, she drove there herself, and she stood in front of the iron gate for nearly a minute before pressing the bell, not because she was afraid, but because she was calculating whether the gas left in her tank would last the entire week. Inside the house, everything was quiet. That was the first thing she noticed. The household staff moved without making noise. The gardener lowered his head when she passed, and all of them spoke to one another in half voices, even when they were only asking where the clean towels were kept. Salvatore Corvino's room was in the east wing, with windows facing the garden. He was 68 years old, the right side of his body still weak, his right hand unable to grip firmly, and his mouth pulling crooked whenever he tried to speak. On that first morning, he refused to eat. He pushed the tray away and turned his face toward the wall. Adeline didn't coax him. She pulled a chair beside the bed, set down the spoon, and said that if he didn't swallow, she would have to write in his chart that the patient was refusing food. Then the doctor would read it. Then people would start discussing a feeding tube, and she thought he would hate that tube more than he hated her. Salvatore turned back and looked at her. The old man watched her for a very long time. Then he opened his mouth. From that day on, their days had an order to them. Mornings were for swallowing exercises, 1 small spoonful at a time. Food thickened to the proper consistency, chin slightly lowered. Mid-morning was for speech practice. She made him repeat simple words, the names of fruits, the days of the week, and she never supplied a word for him when he got stuck. She simply sat there and waited. In the afternoons, She read the newspaper aloud to him, really read it, the sports section and the obituaries alike, and some days he tapped one finger against the bedrail to make her read a passage again. She read it again, and gradually the entire household began to notice something strange, that whenever Elias Corvino entered that room, the new nurse didn't lower her voice. She simply finished whatever sentence she was already speaking. One afternoon he stood in the doorway and asked how things were going, and she answered without taking her eyes off the sheet where she was recording Salvatore's readings, then asked him what he had eaten that day. He said he'd eaten. "What did you eat?" "I ate." "I asked what you ate." Elias went silent. Adeline set the paper down. "The cook told me your tray came upstairs untouched this morning and went back down untouched. Same thing yesterday. The day before that, you didn't come home." She pointed to the chair beside the window. "Sit down." A nursing aide was folding towels in the room. She froze in place, still holding a towel halfway through a fold, her eyes lowered. Elias didn't move. "Are you joking? I'm taking care of a man who just had a stroke," Adeline said. "His closest blood relative keeps walking in and out of this room looking like that. Not eating, not sleeping, and I'm guessing never checking his blood pressure either. Sit down. It'll take 3 minutes. I have plenty of other work to do." From the bed, Salvatore made a rough sound deep in his throat. It took everyone a moment to realize the old man was laughing. Elias sat down. She wrapped the cuff around his arm, inflated it, read the numbers, removed it, then wrote them on a separate sheet without commenting. She only told him he should eat something before evening, then turned back to her patient. Elias remained in the room a little longer. He stood, walked to the bedside, and Salvatore caught hold of his sleeve with his stronger left hand. The old man tried to speak, his mouth twisted, his throat forced out a sound that caught halfway. Then he tried again. 3 broken, hoarse, indistinct words came out. "That girl looks." Then he stopped. The entire room waited for the 4th word. Salvatore opened his mouth again, but this time nothing came out. His hand released Elias's sleeve and fell onto the blanket. The old man's eyes filled with tears, and he turned his face toward the wall just as he had on the first morning. Adeline stepped closer, rested one hand on his shoulder, and told him it was all right, that he'd done well enough for today, that they would try again tomorrow. She turned around, intending to ask Elias who the old man had been trying to mention, but he was already gone. The bedroom door had closed, and she could hear his footsteps moving quickly down the hallway, much faster than a man like him normally walked through his own home. That night, Salvatore tossed and turned several times, and Adeline stayed. She had called home to let June know, checked his readings one last time after midnight, then went downstairs to the kitchen with the medication file tucked under one arm because she wanted to verify the morning dosage before lying down. She switched on the small light above the sink, sat at the long wooden table in the middle of the kitchen, and spread the papers out in front of her. She made it through only a few pages. Her head began to lower, then it dropped all the way. When Elias came downstairs, the clock on the wall showed a little after 2 o'clock. He had come down for water, barefoot, without turning on the main lights. He took 2 steps and stopped. Adeline had fallen asleep at the table, one cheek resting against the file, her right hand still gripping the edge of a page as though she were afraid it might blow away. The pen was still lying uncapped in her left palm. On the page beneath her cheek was a line she hadn't finished writing, the handwriting steady at first, then wandering before trailing into a blurred mark down the margin. Elias didn't get the water. He stood there for a while. Then he turned, walked back down the hallway, and returned with his coat draped over one arm. He moved around behind her slowly and placed the coat over her shoulders, lifting the collar to cover the back of her neck, then adjusting the left side so it wouldn't slide off. Adeline didn't wake. She only took one deeper breath, her face sinking a little farther into the papers. Elias stepped back. He reached for the pen in her palm, capped it, and placed it on the table a short distance from her hand, so that if she moved in her sleep, she wouldn't knock it away. Then he pulled out the chair across from her. He moved it so quietly that he lifted it from the floor instead of dragging it, and he sat down. He didn't take out his phone. He didn't open any of his own files. He didn't say anything. He simply sat there with both hands resting on the table, and he stayed. The only sounds in the kitchen were the refrigerator and the wind brushing against the window frame behind the sink. At one point, a light rain began and then stopped. Once or twice, Adeline shifted, the edge of the coat slipping from her shoulder, and Elias leaned forward to pull it back into place before sitting down in exactly the same position again. The bulb above the sink flickered once, then burned steadily. The first gray light crept slowly across the window until he could make out the grain in the wooden tabletop without needing the lamp anymore. Upstairs, water began moving through the pipes. Someone in the secondary kitchen started the day's work. Adeline opened her eyes. She sat upright too quickly, one hand going to her cheek, her vision not yet focused, and the coat slipped into her lap. She looked at the coat, then she looked across the table. Elias was still sitting there, his back straight, both hands resting exactly where they had been on the tabletop. "How long have you been sitting here?" she asked. "Not long," he said. He stood, walked to the sink, poured himself a glass of water, and drank all of it with his back turned to her. Outside the window, morning had fully arrived. A few nights later, she went down to the kitchen again. And this time he was already sitting there. In front of him was an empty glass. Adeline stopped in the doorway and was about to turn around, but he told her to come in, that he had no intention of chasing anyone out of his own kitchen at midnight. She poured herself some water, sat in the chair across from him, and for a long while neither of them spoke. Then he asked her a question that had nothing to do with his uncle. "At the hospital, how long can a patient be left lying in the hallway before it's considered too long?" Adeline set her glass down. "It depends," she said. "It depends on triage, on how many beds are available, on how many more critical cases there are that day. But if you're asking me, I'll tell you the truth. There isn't a number. For some people, 15 minutes is already too long. Someone else can lie there half the day and still be fine. What if that person doesn't have a chart?" She looked at him. "Everyone has a chart. What if the chart is under someone else's name?" In the kitchen, the refrigerator shifted into a different cycle and then went quiet. Elias slowly turned the empty glass once against the tabletop. "My mother died one winter," he said. "I won't tell you how many years it's been, because I stopped counting a long time ago. My family was under pressure then. The federal agents had cameras set up at the end of the street. They sat in cars 3 shifts a day, photographing the face of anyone who walked out through the gates of my house. My father was already dead. I was away, dealing with something I believed at the time was important." He paused. "One evening my mother complained of chest pain. Someone from the house took her in, and they admitted her to the emergency room under a name that wasn't hers." Adeline sat perfectly still. "You understand why," Elias said. "If she'd been admitted under her real name, someone would have known within an hour, and there would have been people waiting at the door. So they gave another name. No address, no insurance number, no visitors. No one was allowed to call and ask about her. No one from my family was permitted to be inside that building. That's how they decided to handle it that night. And then? Then she lay in the hallway," he said. "Not in a room, in the hallway. You work in that world, so you already know how it goes. Someone with no real chart, no family, no one calling their name, no one standing at the desk asking questions for them. That person slips to the bottom of the list, not because anyone is cruel, simply because there's always someone sicker, someone with a name, someone with family standing there." He set the glass down. "She lay there all night. Then she died, alone, in the middle of a crowded place." Adeline opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't ask the question anyone else would have asked. She had worked in medicine long enough to know that some questions were better left until a person chose to answer them on their own. And Elias did. "You're wondering where I was?" "No," she said. "I wasn't going to ask. Go ahead. Everyone asks. People tell me I got there too late." He looked up, and beneath the small light over the sink, there was nothing in his eyes. No anger, no pain, only a deep kind of exhaustion. "I didn't get there too late," he said. "I didn't even know I was supposed to come." Adeline didn't move. "No one called me," he continued. "Not once. They decided everything would be fine, that it would only be a few hours, that if they told me, I'd fly back and walk into that building and everything would fall apart. So they waited. I found out after it was already over. I picked up my phone and saw that it hadn't rung once that entire night. Do you understand what that feels like? A person can forgive himself for arriving too late, but no one teaches you how to forgive yourself for sleeping peacefully through the night." In the kitchen, a single drop of water fell into the sink. Adeline looked down at her hands resting on the table. "Do you know what frightens me most about this job?" she said. Elias didn't answer. "It's not emergencies. It's not losing a patient. That hurts, but I can prepare myself for that. She looked up. What frightens me is the hallway. Every shift, I walk through it more times than I could count, and every time I think that among all those people lying there waiting, there's one person I've just walked past. They don't cry out. They don't call. They lie there quietly because they don't want to bother anyone. Because they think it isn't their turn yet. Because they've already waited so long that they no longer believe anyone will come if they call. And I'm carrying a tray. I'm moving fast toward an alarm sounding at the other end of the hall. I walk past them. She said the last sentence very softly. Every night I wonder who I walked past that day. Elias looked at her for a very long time. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything at all. He only stood, carried his empty glass to the sink, set it down, and remained there with his back to her until she heard him draw in one long breath. At the end of the first month, he handed her a check in the study, and she stared at the number written on it longer than necessary. Then she placed it on the desk, turned it sideways, and tore it in half. Elias said nothing. Adeline pulled a blank sheet from her notepad, wrote down the amount stated in the contract, every word exactly as it appeared there, then pushed the paper toward him. "You pay me this," she said. "No more. You do more than what's written in the contract. Then change the contract. Give it to your lawyer. Rewrite the scope of work. Spell out what extra work I do and how much each part is worth. I'll sign it." She tapped one finger against the paper. "But not that. You pay me what my work is worth. Don't pay me the price of my silence." Elias looked up. "You think I'm buying your silence. I don't think it. I know it." She folded her arms. "Last Thursday afternoon, I walked past this room to pick up the physician's order you left on the desk. The door was partly open. There were 3 people in here. I stood outside long enough to hear an entire sentence, and I stayed for one more because I didn't believe my own ears. Outside the window, the wind moved through the trees. Are you going to explain?" she asked. Elias placed both hands on the desk. He didn't stand, didn't close the door, didn't lower his voice. "No," he said. "That's it? What do you want me to say? That you heard wrong? You didn't. That it isn't what you think? It is exactly what you think. That I was forced into it. That I was born into this house and never had a choice. That whatever my father left me is something I have no choice but to keep." He shook his head once. "People tell themselves things like that so they can sleep at night. I stopped using those excuses a long time ago." Adeline didn't take her eyes off him. "Then who are you?" "I'm not a good man," Elias said. "Don't ever mistake me for one. There are things I've done that, if I told you about them, would make you get up from that chair and never come back to this house. I don't intend to tell you, and I don't intend to ask you to think differently of me." He pointed to the paper with the number she had written. "But notice this. Since the night I stood in the hallway outside your apartment, I haven't lied to you once. You asked whether the job was legal, and I told you it was. You asked whether you'd have to hide anything, and I didn't say no. I told you the part that was difficult to hear. You asked whether you could leave whenever you wanted, and I had it written into the contract. I'm not a good man, Miss Marsh. I simply haven't lied to you once." Adeline sat in silence for a very long time. She looked at him, at the room, at the dark wooden desk around which 3 men had sat only a few days earlier, discussing things she wished she had never heard. "Do you know what bothers me most?" she said. "It isn't what you've done. I work in cardiology. I've dressed wounds on every kind of person, and I've never asked anyone how they make their living before I put my hands on them." She stood. "What bothers me is that you talk about it as though it's weather. As though it simply fell on you, and all you did was stand there getting wet." She picked up the paper with her number on it, folded it, and slipped it into the pocket of her lab coat. Then she walked toward the door, and at the threshold she stopped and looked back. "That night your mother was lying in the hallway," she said. "You didn't get to choose. You didn't know. No one called you. You weren't there. That wasn't your fault." Elias said nothing. "But now you know," she said. "Back then, you didn't get to choose. Now you do." Then she walked out and closed the door behind her. The alarm from the east wing woke the entire house at 3 o'clock in the morning. Adeline had been sleeping in the small room next door, and she was there before the second alarm finished sounding. She turned on the light, took one look, and in less than the length of a breath, she knew exactly what was happening. She didn't call for anyone. She yanked the blanket onto the floor, lowered the head of the bed in a single motion, swept the pillow aside, and placed both hands on the old man's chest. Then she began. She counted out loud, steady. Neither too fast nor too slow. And she didn't take her eyes off Salvatore's face for even a second. Between counts, she shouted toward the doorway, her voice carrying loudly enough for people downstairs to hear, telling them to call emergency services immediately, to give the exact address, to say clearly that the patient had suffered a previous stroke, to open the front gate and turn on every light along the entrance. Footsteps broke into a frantic run in the hallway. Someone knocked something over near the stairs. Elias reached the bedroom door and stopped there. He didn't step inside. The man whose name made an entire city lower its voice stood at the threshold of his own uncle's room, with both arms hanging uselessly at his sides, and there wasn't a single thing in the world he could do at that moment. He could call anyone. He could buy anything. He couldn't do what the woman kneeling on the mattress was doing, so he stood still, and he never took his eyes off her. Adeline kept counting. She stopped for exactly 1 beat to lower her head and listen, then placed her hands back down and continued. Her hair had come loose from its tie and was stuck against one cheek, but she didn't brush it away. Sweat ran down her temple, but she didn't wipe it. Every time she lifted her head, it was only to look at the clock on the wall before bending down again. She spoke to the old man while she worked. She called his name. She told him to stay. She told him they still had to finish reading the section he liked tomorrow. Not a single word in her voice trembled. Then came the siren outside the gate. Then lights swept across the ceiling. Then 3 people in reflective uniforms rushed down the hallway with a stretcher and a hard medical case. Adeline still didn't stop until one of them placed a hand on her shoulder and told her he was taking over. She moved back. She gave her report immediately. Clear, concise, complete. The time she found him, what she had done, how long she had been doing it, what medications he was taking, the dosages, how long ago the stroke had happened, what medical history he had. The paramedic kept nodding and writing. Then they lifted the stretcher. Then they left. Then the siren faded away along the main road, and all that remained in the room was the blanket lying on the floor and the bright ceiling light still burning overhead. Adeline stood there. She raised one hand to brush the strand of hair from her cheek, and she couldn't do it. She tried again. Her hand was shaking so badly that she had to grab it with the other one, and then both of them began to shake. She sat down on the edge of the bed. Elias stepped into the room. He stopped some distance away from her, looking at those 2 hands. "Your hands weren't shaking a moment ago," he said. Adeline looked down. "A moment ago I didn't have time to be afraid," she said. He didn't answer. He simply stood there, still looking at her, still refusing to look anywhere else, even after the ambulance lights at the far end of the road had completely disappeared from view. Salvatore made it through that night and remained in the hospital for several more days of observation, and on the final afternoon, when Elias went down to the garage to get his car, a man was already standing beside it waiting for him. Gideon Falk was 47 years old, wearing a gray coat, empty-handed, with no one beside him. That was the first thing Elias noticed. People only stood alone when they were certain they didn't need anyone. Corvino. Elias didn't stop walking until he reached the car door. "You're standing in the wrong place. I'm standing exactly where I need to stand." Falk placed a bound stack of documents on the hood, about as thick as the first joint of a finger, then stepped back half a pace and left it there. "Thanks for watching. Take it home and read it. There's no rush." Elias looked at the papers. He didn't touch them. "You know what's good about the times we live in now," Falk said. His voice was calm, almost friendly, the voice of a man discussing business over lunch. "When your father was alive, people settled things in very expensive ways. Expensive in men, expensive in money, expensive in decades spent sitting quietly somewhere if you were unlucky. No one does it that way anymore. Now all I need is one signature from the right person, placed in the right drawer, and you'll lose more than you think. Clean. Legal. No one has to wash their hands afterward." Elias still said nothing. "The harbor route," Falk said. "I need it. I'm not asking for it, and I'm not planning to negotiate a price. I came only to tell you that this time I need it quickly, and I don't have time to wait while you think it over in that way of yours." There was one very brief moment when his voice dropped half a note on the word time. Elias heard it. He stored it away in his mind and said nothing. "And this," Falk continued, touching one finger to the cover of the documents, "is the part I think you'll care about more. You've got someone new in your house. A nurse. Adeline Marsh." Elias turned and looked at him for the first time. "She worked here," Falk said, tipping his chin toward the garage ceiling, toward the entire hospital above them. Then she stopped working here. Now she's in your house. Do you know what her profession depends on? A license. And do you know how long that license remains standing? Exactly as long as it takes from the moment someone files a complaint until the state board meets. No evidence required. All it takes is a statement from someone with the right title, and they suspend first, investigate later. That's procedure. No one has done anything wrong. Elias didn't blink. I'm not threatening her, Falk said. I've never met her, and I've got nothing against her. I'm only showing you leverage. You keep her in your house, then she's yours. Anything that's yours can be placed on my side of the scale. He adjusted the collar of his coat. Take the papers home and read them. There are a few names in there belonging to people you think are yours. Once you've read it, you'll understand where I stand in all of this. Then he walked away. The sound of his shoes echoed evenly along the rows of concrete columns before disappearing completely near the exit. Elias remained alone beside the car. He didn't pick up the documents right away. He stood there for about a minute, his eyes resting on the hood without really seeing it, while inside his mind everything was being rearranged quickly and neatly, the way it happened automatically, for a man who had been in control long enough. The half-note drop in Falk's voice, the word quickly, the fact that he had come alone, the fact that he had chosen a hospital garage instead of anywhere else. Nico emerged from the stairwell, saw the papers on the hood, and stopped. Who was just here? Elias opened the car door. Falk. Nico reached for the documents and flipped open the first page. Do you want me to put someone on him? No. Elias got into the driver's seat, closed the door, then lowered the window. He said exactly one sentence, his voice perfectly ordinary, as though reminding Nico to pick up bread on the way home. Find out whether Gideon Falk has been seeing any doctors lately. Nico stood frozen in the middle of the garage with the documents in his hands, and all the color drained from his face. On Friday night, she drove home along her usual route through Wickenden Street, and halfway down the hill she had to brake because a car was parked across the road ahead, blocking the lane. Its taillights glowed red. No one honked. There were no cars behind her. Adeline sat motionless behind the wheel, both hands still exactly where they had been, and looked through the windshield. The other car's door opened. A man stepped out. He didn't hurry. He walked around to the front of her car, stopped beside the hood, and didn't take a single step toward her door. No one knocked on the window. No one reached inside. No one said a word. The man took a photograph from inside his coat, placed it on the hood of her car, smoothed it flat with one finger, then withdrew his hand. He looked at her through the glass for the length of a single beat, only one, then turned away. He got back into the car. The vehicle started and drove off down the hill, turned left at the intersection, and disappeared. The entire street was empty again. Adeline remained sitting there for a while. She could hear the steady sound of her own engine and the wind slipping through the edge of the door. She opened it, stepped out, walked 2 paces toward the front, and picked up the photograph. It was a picture of June sitting in the chair at the dialysis center, her hair tied crookedly to one side the way she always wore it, taken from a distance, taken through the glass, taken from the hallway outside, a place where anyone could stand, the same place where Adeline herself had waited through more afternoons than she could count. She looked at the photograph. She didn't cry. She didn't turn around to see whether someone might still be standing somewhere nearby. She didn't run back to the car and lock herself inside. She stood straight in the middle of Wickenden Street beneath the streetlight, and something very strange settled inside her chest. Not fear, but a cold, clean anger, the kind that never needed to make a sound. Over all those years, she had learned that when people wanted you to break, the best answer was not to break. She thought about her sister sitting at home waiting for her. She thought about how June would ask how her day had been and what she would say. Then she held the photograph in both hands and tore it in half. She tore it slowly, firmly, without jerking. She placed the 2 halves together and tore them once more. Then she walked to the edge of the street, dropped the pieces into the storm drain, and stood watching as the running water carried them away. She returned to the car, closed the door, fastened her seatbelt, adjusted the rearview mirror, and kept driving. She got home on time. She made dinner. When June asked how her day had been, Adeline said it had been long, and that was the truth. And she said nothing more. That same evening, on the other side of the city, Nico called Elias's private number. He reported exactly what his people had seen on Wickenden Street: the car blocking the road, the man getting out, the photograph placed on the hood, no one touching her. Then he told him the final part, the part he delivered much more slowly than everything before it: how she had gotten out of the car, stood there, torn the photograph into 4 pieces, dropped them into the drain, then driven away without looking back even once. On the other end of the call, Elias didn't ask a single question. He listened to all of it. Then he ended the call, placed the phone on the desk, and sat motionless in the dark study. He didn't call anyone. He didn't break anything. He only sat there for a very long time, one hand resting on the desk without moving. And throughout that enormous house there wasn't a single sound. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning by certified mail, with a signature required upon delivery. In the upper left corner were the words, Rhode Island Board of Nursing. Adeline opened it right there in the apartment hallway, standing beneath the flickering light, and she read the entire first page, without understanding any of it. She read it a second time. There was a complaint. There was an allegation that while she was still employed at the hospital, she had removed controlled medication from a secured cabinet without recording it in the medication log. Her nursing license had been placed under review. She would be required to appear at a hearing. The second page was a copy of a sworn statement. Someone had signed it. Someone who had written that he had personally witnessed the incident, had given the exact date, the exact time, and the exact floor where the medication cabinet was located. Adeline looked down at the signature line, Dean Holloway. She stood motionless for a very long time. The hallway smelled of the same familiar dampness, and the light above her flickered once before coming back on, and inside her head there were no thoughts at all, only one long, steady ringing sound. It had been a very long time since she had seen that name written out in front of her. She had thought she had cleared it from her life during the season when the debts at home began climbing sharply, the season when he had sat at her kitchen table and told her he couldn't do it anymore, that he wasn't going to sign himself into a life sentence like that she would understand. And then he had left the ring on the table and walked out the door. She had understood. She had understood, and had never called him back even once. That afternoon she drove to the hospital. She didn't go upstairs. She parked in the west lot where the employees still parked and sat in her car until the workday ended. He came out after the sky had darkened, wearing a white shirt, an identification badge hanging from his chest with the words Pharmacy Coordinator printed across it, and he walked straight toward his car without looking around. Adeline got out and called his name. Dean Holloway stopped. He turned his head, and what sent a chill down her spine wasn't that he looked surprised. It was that he didn't look surprised at all. Adeline, you signed this. She held up the paper. You put your name on this. Yeah. He didn't deny it for even half a second. He simply stood there with his car keys still in his hand. You know it isn't true. I know. Then why did you sign it? He exhaled. They asked me if I'd ever worked with you. I said yes. They asked if I'd ever seen anything. I said yes. He gave the smallest shrug, and that shrug was what made her feel like she might be sick. Next week, I move into management for pharmacy operations across the whole district. I've been waiting 3 years for that position. Adeline heard her own voice when she spoke, and it didn't sound like hers. 3 years. You sold me for 3 years of waiting. I didn't sell you. You signed a paper saying I stole medication. She stepped closer. Do you understand what that means? It isn't just losing a job. It's over. No hospital in this state will hire me again. No clinic. I won't be allowed to stand beside a patient's bed for the rest of my life. Don't make this bigger than it is. June is waiting for a transplant, Dean. He went silent, and in that silence, for the first time, she saw him blink. My insurance comes through my job, she said. You know that. You sat in my apartment. You heard the doctor explain it right in front of you. Dean Holloway looked down at the keys in his hand. Then he raised his eyes, and his voice hardened, the particular kind of hardness that belonged to someone who had rehearsed this answer in his mind many times before anyone ever asked the question. You chose all of this yourself, Adeline. I told you back then. I told you to put the girl into a state program, let the government take care of her, and leave. You had a chance. You didn't have to stay. She's my sister. And I told you that you were going to sink with her. He opened the car door. You chose to stay. No one forced you. You chose this road a long time ago. Today you're just reaching the end of it. He got into the car. He didn't apologize. Not one word. The car backed out of the parking space, turned, and drove out of the lot. Adeline remained standing between the two rows of cars with the paper in her hand, and the overhead light above her came on at the exact moment the sky went completely dark. The storm came down over Providence that afternoon, and by 7 o'clock that evening, nearly the entire state had ground to a halt. June was in the middle of a dialysis session at the center across the river when her condition suddenly worsened. Adeline received the call just as she got home, and the nurse on the other end spoke very quickly, saying that June's heart rhythm had become unstable, that they had stopped the dialysis session, that the center wasn't equipped to manage what was happening, and that she needed to be transferred to a hospital immediately. Adeline asked where the ambulance was. The nurse said they had already called one. She said it was stuck. Adeline raced down the stairs, and the moment she reached her car, she understood what was happening. Snow had buried everything. The wind was blowing sideways, and at the end of the main road there was a long line of red taillights that wasn't moving at all. She turned on the radio. They announced that a fallen tree was blocking the approach to the bridge. They announced that the tow truck still couldn't get through. They announced that the main routes were closed until further notice. She sat in the car with both hands on the steering wheel and called emergency dispatch. She listened to hold music. She called again. More hold music. She called the dialysis center, and they told her they were doing everything they could, that they were still waiting, that she shouldn't try to drive out onto the roads in those conditions. Adeline ended the call. She sat motionless inside the freezing car, and for the first time in all those years, there wasn't a single name left in her mind to call. Her parents were gone. Old friends had fallen away during the years when she never went anywhere, never saw anyone, never accepted invitations. Her old workplace had just pushed her out the door, and the man who had once sat at her kitchen table had signed his name to a piece of paper in exchange for a title. She looked down at the phone in her palm. She opened her contacts. She scrolled. She stopped at a name she had never once called since saving it in her phone. She closed her eyes for 1 second, then pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Miss Marsh. Adeline opened her mouth, and no words came out. She drew in a breath. Then she spoke, and her voice broke on the very first word. My sister is at the dialysis center across the river. She's getting worse. The ambulance can't get through. Every road is closed. She heard herself continue, faster now, more desperate. I'm not calling you for money. I don't need money right now. Money can't do anything. I'm calling because I've been sitting here for 20 minutes, and I can't think of anyone else to call. There was a very brief silence on the other end. Where are you? In my car, in front of my apartment. Stay there. Don't drive onto the main road. Then he ended the call. What happened next was something Adeline would later tell people, and no one would believe. In less than 10 minutes, 3 heavy trucks, fitted with snowplows, pulled out of the yard of a transportation company near the harbor and headed toward the bridge. Not one of the drivers asked why. Nico called someone at a tree service, and that man called 2 more people, and a tow truck with chainsaws reached the fallen tree before fresh snow had time to cover the tire tracks behind them. Elias called the private number of the city's fire chief directly. He didn't identify himself. He didn't threaten him. He only reminded him of something that had happened many years earlier, something Elias's family had done for the other man's family when they had no one left to ask for help, and he said that tonight he was asking to call in that favor. The man on the other end was silent for several seconds, then asked for the address. The ambulance, led by a fire department vehicle, reached the dialysis center shortly before 10 o'clock that night. A snowplow drove ahead of it, clearing a straight path all the way from the center to the hospital emergency entrance, and not once during the entire trip did the ambulance have to stop. Adeline was brought there in another vehicle, sitting in the back seat with both hands clenched tightly together, and she didn't say a single word to anyone the entire way. She was standing in the emergency department hallway when they wheeled her sister through the double doors. Then she waited. She waited all night. Someone came out to speak with her once after midnight, then again close to 3 o'clock in the morning, and the second time the doctor told her June was stable, that she would remain in the hospital for observation, and that if she had arrived any later, things could have been very different. Adeline nodded. She thanked him. She asked a few more questions about the medications and dosages, wrote the answers on the back of a piece of paper she had in her pocket, then thanked him again. Only after the doctor walked away did she sit down in one of the plastic chairs in the hallway and lower her head over her hands. Near dawn, the only sound in the corridor was the heating system. Elias walked toward her carrying 2 cups of coffee from the machine at the far end of the hall. He held one out to her. Adeline looked up, stared at it for a moment, then reached out and took it. He sat down in the chair with one empty seat between them. Together, they looked toward the double doors, and neither of them said a word. The board's decision arrived before June was discharged from the hospital. One sheet of paper, printed on one side, written in administrative language, without a single cruel word on it. Adeline Marsh's nursing license was temporarily suspended pending investigation. She wasn't permitted to perform any professional nursing duties until a final determination was made. No one said she was guilty. No one said she was innocent. They simply took the profession out of her hands for the time being and told her to sit and wait. She called Elias's company that same afternoon and terminated her own contract, not because anyone told her to, because she was no longer legally allowed to do the work she had been hired to do, and she wouldn't accept money for a title she no longer had the right to carry. Along with that signature, June's insurance coverage ended too. The letter from the transplant center arrived a few days later. Adeline read it at the kitchen table, and she read it very slowly, carefully going through every line, because she knew this kind of letter, and she knew it never stated plainly what it was really trying to say. The center informed them that Juniper Marsh's file would remain on the transplant waiting list. However, because the patient could no longer demonstrate continuous financial coverage for anti-rejection medication, her status had been changed to inactive. June sat across the table from her. "What does that mean, Addie?" Adeline set the paper down. She thought about softening it. Then she remembered the night June had sat in that same chair and told her she was sick, not stupid. "It means your name is still on the list," she said. "But if a kidney becomes available that's a match for you, they won't call us. They'll call the next person. Because we don't have money. Because the transplant isn't the end of it," Adeline said. "After the transplant, you have to take anti-rejection medication every single day. You can't miss even one day. For the rest of your life. If you stop, your body can reject the kidney, and then a kidney is lost that might have saved someone else. That's why every transplant center has to ask that question first. It isn't because they're cruel. They're just counting." June sat quietly. "So I've been pushed off the list." "You haven't been pushed off. You've been placed on hold." "What's the difference, Addie?" Adeline couldn't answer that. Outside the window, a snowplow passed, and its yellow lights swept across the kitchen ceiling before disappearing. "Can you donate to me?" June asked. Adeline didn't look up. "We're the same blood type. Dad used to." The girl stopped in the middle of the sentence, and Adeline knew her sister had finally reached the exact place both of them had avoided for all those years. "Tell me, Addie," June said softly. "I'm 19 now. Tell me." Adeline raised one hand and lifted the right side of her shirt about the width of her palm. The scar lay beneath her ribs, long and faded with the years. The kind of scar you only noticed once you already knew what you were looking for. "You've seen it since you were little," she said. "You never asked. I was afraid it would make you sad." "Dad's liver was failing," Adeline said. "They told us there was one way. A living person could donate part of their liver to a relative. I was 19, exactly your age now." She let the fabric fall back into place. "I signed the papers. I got on the operating table. They took part of my liver and transplanted it into Dad." June seemed to stop breathing. "He got 6 weeks," Adeline said. "Then Dad died." In the kitchen, the refrigerator shifted into another cycle and then went quiet. "And that still wasn't the worst part," she continued, her voice perfectly ordinary. "The worst part was that I had promised him. The night before surgery, Dad held my hand and asked if I was sure. And I told him, 'Dad, I'm sure. After this, you'll get better. You'll come home. You'll watch her grow up.' I said those words out loud. I promised him as though I had any right to make that promise." She looked down at both hands resting on the table. "After that, they wouldn't let me donate again. I asked. I asked in a lot of places. They looked at my records and shook their heads. And they were right, because they're not allowed to take away something when a person only has so much left." She raised her eyes to her sister. "Do you know why I can't bring myself to promise you anything?" she said. "Because the last time I made a promise, I made it to Dad. She kept going to that house, not as a nurse, because she no longer had the right to carry that title, but as someone who came to sit beside an old man's bed a few afternoons each week. She didn't take a single dollar." Elias argued with her about that exactly once, then stopped, and Salvatore was visibly improving. The old man could speak in short sentences now. His right hand could hold a pen, and they had given him a small whiteboard so he could write the things his mouth still couldn't keep up with. That afternoon, Adeline had just finished reading the obituaries when Salvatore tapped one finger against the bedrail. She handed him the board and the pen. The old man wrote very slowly, his handwriting trembling, and he wrote 2 words, "I'm sorry." Then he put the pen down, turned his face toward the wall, and wouldn't turn back. Adeline asked what he was sorry for. He didn't answer. She asked again, more gently. The old man closed his eyes. She stood and went outside to call Elias, and when he entered the room, Salvatore was still lying there facing the wall, the whiteboard still resting on the blanket with those 2 words written across it. Elias picked up the board. He stared at it for a very long time. Then he pulled a chair beside the bed, sat down, and said in a low, steady voice, "Turn around." Nothing happened. "Uncle Salvatore, turn around." The old man turned. His eyes were wet. "Who did you write this for?" Salvatore didn't answer. "You wrote it for me," Elias said. "Didn't you?" The old man opened his mouth. His throat dragged out a sound that caught. Then he tried again, and this time the words came, broken and hoarse, each one costing him a breath. He spoke about a winter. He spoke about the cars parked at the end of the street through 3 shifts every day. He said that on the night they called to tell him she was having chest pain, he had been the one who decided. He had been the one who ordered them to take her in a family car instead of calling an ambulance. He had been the one who told them to give a different name at admissions. He had been the one who ordered that no one from the family set foot inside that building, that no one call to ask questions, that no one stand in the hallway. And he had been the one who told them not to tell Elias. Adeline stood at the foot of the bed and felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "I thought it would be a few hours," Salvatore said. Every word had to be dragged from his throat. "I thought I'd bring her home in the morning. I was wrong." No one in the room moved. "I was afraid," the old man said. "Afraid for the whole family. Afraid we'd lose everything. Then I lost my sister-in-law." Elias stood. He placed the whiteboard on the bedside cabinet very carefully, almost gently, then walked out of the room without saying a word. Adeline heard the study door close at the far end of the hallway. Then she heard something break. It didn't last long. Only a few breaths. Then complete silence. She didn't run toward it. She stayed in the room with the old man crying soundlessly in the bed, and she did what her hands had learned to do over all those years. She pulled the blanket higher. She rested a hand on his shoulder. She poured water and brought the straw to his mouth. She stayed until his breathing became even again. That evening, Elias found her in the kitchen. He stood in the doorway, his right hand wrapped in a piece of cloth, and looked at her as though she were something he couldn't understand. "You still gave him water," he said. "He was thirsty. Did you hear what he just told us?" "I heard all of it." "Then why did you still put your hands on him?" Adeline set the glass down. "Because I save people," she said. "I don't decide who deserves it. If I start deciding, then tomorrow I'll stand beside a bed wondering what this person has done, what that person has done, and I won't be doing my profession anymore. I'm not allowed to do that. Even now, when they won't let me practice anymore, I'm still not allowed to do that." Elias looked at her for a very long time. Then something in his face closed. "Go home," he said. "I'll stay a little longer until he falls asleep. Go home for good." Adeline looked up. "Did you hear me?" he said. His voice wasn't loud. That was what made it cut. "You were an employee. You signed a contract with my company, and you terminated it yourself. It's over. Since that day, what exactly have you been coming into this house as?" "Nothing. You come because you like the feeling of having somewhere to go." "You don't mean that. Have you ever wondered why your sister's name is still on that list?" he said. "Where do you think that insurance came from? Who do you think signed that contract? Who do you think paid the part you never saw? You stand in my kitchen and lecture me about who deserves what." "Miss Marsh, you're living on my money." Adeline stood. She didn't say anything. She went to get her coat, put it on, fastened each button one by one, and walked to the door. She didn't look back, and Elias remained exactly where he was in the kitchen until he heard her car pass through the gates. Then he sat down in the chair she had just left and buried his face in both hands. The meeting took place on Saturday night in the mansion's large dining room, a room that, according to Corvino family custom, was used only a few times each year. 6 men sat around the long table. The youngest among them had been with Elias's father since before Elias could read. The oldest, Bruno Serafini, sat at the opposite end of the table, with both hands resting on the wood, and he never touched the glass of wine that had been poured for him. Elias didn't sit down. He placed 2 files on the table. One was thick, the other was thinner. "This," he said, pushing the thick file toward the center of the table, "belongs to Gideon Falk. Every financial trail from the last 4 years, the companies held in other people's names, the transfers through the harbor, the names of the people inside this city who took his money. My lawyers have reviewed every page. No one touched it. And this," he said, resting one hand on the thinner file, "is mine." Somewhere in the room, someone set a glass down on the table. "Next week I'm turning in both." No one spoke for so long that they could hear the clock ticking in the next room. Then Bruno Serafini spoke, his voice rough and slow. "Say that again? You heard me. You said you're taking that file to them." "I'm taking both files to them," Elias said. "I'll sit down with my lawyer and give a statement. Not about any of you. About me. About what I signed. What I knew. What I allowed to happen. The old side of the business ends tonight. As for the harbor, I'm returning it to the legitimate transportation company. The books will be open. Anyone who wants to look can look." "And what happens to us?" another man asked. "Anyone who wants to leave can leave. No one will stop you. No one will come looking for you. Anyone who wants to stay can stay and work the part that's left. The part my father always called the front. The part all of you spent years looking down on. From now on, that's the only part there is." Bruno Serafini pushed his chair back. The scrape of its legs across the wooden floor carried through the room. He stood and remained there for a moment, looking at Elias from the far end of the table. "I held you in my arms before you could walk," he said. "I carried your father's coffin. I stood in the rain the day we buried your mother." Elias didn't look away. "And now you're going to take our name and lay it down on their table. I'm taking my name. In this house, no name belongs to one person alone," the old man said. He fastened the button of his coat. "I can't stand beside you in this. I'm old now. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not talking to anyone. But I'm not sitting at this table for another minute." Then he walked out. The door closed very softly behind him, and that softness carried more weight than if he had slammed it. The other 4 men remained seated. No one looked at anyone else. Elias let the silence last exactly that long, then spoke again, and this time his voice no longer sounded like he was making an announcement. "You think I'm doing this because I suddenly became a decent man?" No one answered. "My father left me a name no one in this city dares say out loud," he said. "People say it inside cars, behind closed doors, in places where no one else can hear. I grew up thinking that was power. Now I know what it really means. It means when someone in your family needs help, you don't dare stand somewhere the light can reach you. It means there are nights when someone you love has to lie in a place under somebody else's name because your real name isn't safe to carry through the door." One of the 4 men still seated lowered his head. "I'm going to give you back a name people can say in public," Elias said. "Smaller, poorer, but a name that can be spoken out on the street, in broad daylight, in front of anyone." He looked around the table. "If you're leaving, stand up now." Nico Valero stood. Everyone in the room turned to look at him. He remained there, and for one moment, 3 of the men at the table were certain they knew what was about to happen. Then Nico walked around the table, came to stand at Elias's right side, and didn't sit down again. "I'm staying," he said. None of the other 3 men stood. At that same moment, in the east wing of the house, the alarm sounded again. Salvatore was having another episode. The household erupted into motion, and someone, no one ever knew who, called the woman who hadn't set foot in that house for the past month. Adeline answered at the 3rd-floor apartment. She didn't ask a single question. She put down the phone, grabbed her coat, told June she had to go, and drove the entire distance through the night. When she pushed open the bedroom door and stepped inside, Elias was standing there, and the 2 of them looked at each other across the length of the room, without either one managing to say a word. Then she walked straight to the bedside, rolled up her sleeves, and began to work. While reviewing the files in preparation for turning everything over, Elias's lawyer pulled records no one had asked for. She had been doing this long enough to know that when a man volunteered a statement about himself, he needed to know beforehand everything the other side might be able to drag into the light. Among those papers was a very old file requested from the archives of St. Ambrose Mercy Hospital, containing staff schedules, overnight shift reports, and the handwritten log from the volunteer department during that winter. She gave it to him because she thought he might want to know who had been there. Elias read through the night. He read every line. He searched for that night. He found it near the end of the file, on a sheet of ruled paper filled with several different people's handwriting, blue and black ink alternating across the page. And on the third line from the bottom, there was the rounded, careful handwriting of a student, written slowly and neatly. Hallway B, stretcher number 4. Sat with female patient, no family present, patient frightened, held her hand. Beneath it was a signature. A. Marsh. Student volunteer. Elias set the page down. He opened the other file, the one he hadn't opened again in all those years, and turned to the page listing the location. Stretcher number 4. He sat motionless for a very long time. When morning came, he drove to the third-floor apartment. Adeline opened the door and found him standing there, unshaven, his coat wrinkled, a sheet of paper in his hand. She was about to say something about the night before, in Salvatore's room. He didn't let her. Read this. She took the paper. She read it. Then she looked up, and he watched her face change. This is my handwriting, she said. I know. I volunteered there in high school. Evenings. They had us hand out blankets, bring people water, sit with patients who didn't have family. She looked down at the paper again. I remember that night. Elias said nothing. There was an older woman, Adeline said, lying in the hallway. No one came for her. I asked the nurses at the desk, and they said there was no real file, no contact number, nothing. So I sat down beside that stretcher. She stopped. She was scared. She kept apologizing to me. She told me to go do my work, not to sit there because of her. I told her my shift was over. She continued more slowly. Then she held my hand. She told me about her son. She said he was angry with her. She said he was a good boy. He just didn't know. Elias reached out and gripped the doorframe. Then she asked me to do one thing, Adeline said. She turned and went back inside the apartment. She walked into the bedroom, knelt down, and pulled a tin box from beneath the bed, the kind of cookie tin people kept after the holidays. She opened the lid. Inside were several old photographs, a key that no longer belonged to any lock, and a plastic hospital wristband yellowed around the edges. She took it out and held it toward him. A name was printed on the band. Nora Bellamy, she told me, Adeline said, that if I ever met her son someday, I should give this to him, and tell him his mother wasn't angry. Elias couldn't take it. His hand wouldn't lift. I went back the next morning, she said. They told me she was gone. I asked where she lived. No one knew. I searched for that name. I looked through directories, asked churches, called funeral homes. I searched for months. There was no one by that name. She looked at the wristband in her hand. I was only 17. I didn't know people could give a name that wasn't real. I kept thinking I just hadn't searched hard enough. Out in the apartment hallway, the light flickered once. So I kept it, Adeline said. I told myself I'd hold on to it. If I ever found him, I'd give it to him. Elias sank down. He didn't fall. He simply slid slowly along the doorframe until he was sitting on the apartment hallway floor, his back against the stained plaster wall, his head bowed. Adeline knelt in front of him. She took his hand, opened it, and placed the wristband in his palm. Then she closed his fingers around it. He gripped it tightly. He didn't make a sound. She sat there with him. She said nothing. She simply held the hand that was clutching the wristband, just as she had once held another hand on that winter night, and she stayed that way for a very long time. Much later, he finally managed to speak. Hallway B, he said. Where was it? In the old emergency department, she said. They tore it out, renovated it a few years ago, and moved the emergency department into the new wing across the building. She stopped, and then she understood. Her head snapped up. Elias was looking at her. 6th floor, he said. Adeline stopped breathing. That place, that exact stretch of floor, that section of hallway about an arm's length from the wall with the window, where the pitcher had slipped from her hands, where he had stood staring down at his feet for a very long time, while no one on the entire floor dared move. How long had you been standing there? She asked. Before I walked up. 11 minutes, he said. Adeline's case was cleared first, and it was cleared in a way that required no one to threaten anyone. Elias's lawyer submitted the department's complete medication dispensing logs for the period in question to the state board, along with the corresponding recipient signatures and electronic access records for the medication cabinet. On the date listed in the statement, Adeline hadn't even been inside the building. The board called Dean Halloway in for cross-examination, and he sat in that room for about half an hour before asking to withdraw his own statement. No one visited him. No one called him. He lost the new position, then lost the old one as well, and he left the state before spring arrived. Adeline's license was restored with a formal apology printed on official letterhead. She read it once, then put it in a drawer. The following week, Elias established a fund to cover anti-rejection medication, contracting directly with the state pharmacy system to provide lifelong coverage for uninsured patients on the transplant waiting list. It didn't carry his name. There was no press conference. There was only paperwork. The transplant center verified the source of funding over 3 weeks, and Juniper Marsh's status was activated again. Then Elias went in for testing. Adeline wasn't eligible to donate, and both of them already knew that. His results weren't a match for June, but they were a match for another patient waiting in a city not far away, and the transplant coordinator called him to explain something called a paired exchange chain. 6 people, 3 donors, 3 recipients. Each donor would give to a stranger, so that the person they loved could receive a compatible organ from another stranger. Every operation would take place on the same day, during the same window of time, in 3 different hospitals, so no one would have time to change their mind, and no one would be left stranded halfway through. The night before he signed the papers, Nico placed a list on his desk. "You need to look at this." Elias looked. "The donor in the 3rd link," Nico said. "Gideon Falk's wife." Elias nodded. "I know." Nico froze. "How long have you known?" "Since the day he stood in the hospital garage." He pushed the paper back across the desk. "You remember I told you to find out whether he'd been seeing any doctors lately? He has end-stage kidney failure too. His wife is compatible with someone else, but not with him. He needed cash quickly to get both of them into a treatment program outside their insurance coverage, and that place doesn't accept payment plans. That's why he wanted the harbor route. That's why he was in a hurry." Nico looked down at the list, then back up. "Do you understand what's going to happen? If this chain goes forward, he gets a kidney too. You're saving the man who tried to destroy you." "I'm not saving him," Elias said. "I'm saving the person at the other end of the chain. He just happens to be on that chain too. All you have to do is withdraw." "If I withdraw, the whole chain breaks," he said. 6 people, not 1. Nico said nothing more. The 3 surgeries took place on a day near the end of April. The kidney Juniper Marsh received came from the woman whose last name was Falk. No one from either family met, because those were the rules of the program. There were only 6 names on a diagram and 3 arrows connecting them. June woke the following afternoon. She opened her eyes, looked around, recognized her sister sitting in the chair beside the bed, and the first thing she asked wasn't about herself. "How many hours did you sleep?" Adeline laughed. She took her sister's hand. "I slept 4 hours," she said. "Really? I'm telling the truth this time." 3 days later, when she went home to get some things for June, she pulled open the drawer of the old desk and found 4 envelopes tied together with a rubber band. June's handwriting was on each one. "Open when you're too tired. Open on your wedding day. Open when I make you angry." And the last one, "Open if I don't wake up." Adeline sat down on the floor with all 4 envelopes in her lap. She picked up the last one and held it for a very long time. Then she put it down without opening it. She opened the first one instead. She read the entire letter once, then pressed her face into the paper and cried, sitting on the bedroom floor beside the now empty tin box beneath the bed. She tied the other 3 envelopes back together with the rubber band exactly as they had been and returned them to the drawer. The federal hearing took place later, after Elias's surgical wound had healed, and his doctor had cleared him to move around normally again. He sat down with his lawyer and gave his statement. He testified about what he had signed, what he had known, and what he had allowed to happen. He blamed no one. He accepted responsibility for his part and agreed to every condition that came with it. Most of the Corvino family's assets were liquidated and placed under administration. Adeline sat in the back row. Before the hearing began, he turned around exactly once to find her. She nodded. Then he faced forward and began to speak. More than a year later, the iron gates of the Corvino estate in Federal Hill were removed, and the entire front of the house was repainted. On the sign mounted above the front steps was a woman's name, and beneath it were words stating clearly that this was a free clinic, open to everyone, with no questions about insurance and no questions about immigration papers. The great dining room where a long table had once stood, with 6 men seated around it, was now a waiting area. Salvatore Corvino sat in a wheelchair beside the entrance, with a stack of numbered tickets in his lap, handing one to each person who came through the door. Slowly, his right hand still trembling, but steady enough to hold a pen and circle the numbers for anyone whose eyesight was poor. He could speak more than he used to. He still spoke slowly. No one waiting in line ever rushed him. Among the people lined up to register as volunteers that morning was Warren Ashcroft, standing quietly in the middle of the line like everyone else, an application form in his hand. In the waiting area, the children were given stickers, shaped like stars and ambulances, by the women at the reception desk, and they stuck them on the backs of their hands, on their collars, even on the back of their mother's numbered tickets, then giggled and compared who had received more. Elias Corvino had no private office in that building. He had no title written on any door. In the mornings, he checked the heating system on the second floor, because the old equipment still acted up on cold days. And in the evenings, he made coffee for the night shift and carried up each tray himself. He knew the old man in the last row liked his coffee weak. He knew the woman who sold flowers on the corner came in for appointments on Thursdays and needed to be finished before 4 o'clock so she could get back in time to pack up her stall. He knew the name of every person sitting in that waiting room, and he called them by name. That Friday afternoon, Adeline was walking down the first-floor hallway when she saw a student intern standing frozen in the middle of the corridor with a medication tray in her hands. The girl couldn't make herself move forward. The little cups on the tray tapped softly against one another. Adeline walked over, steadied the tray with one hand, and placed her other hand on the girl's shoulder. She asked the exact question someone had once asked her years earlier in a hallway where no one had dared to move. "Why are your hands shaking like that?" And she stood there and waited without rushing her until the girl began to speak. That evening, after the clinic had closed, the two of them sat on the front steps of the house. On Adeline's hand was a very simple ring, one she had been wearing for several months. After an afternoon when there had been only the two of them, Salvatore, June, and a witness who signed the papers at City Hall. No celebration. No guests. "People tell me I lost everything," Elias said. Adeline looked out at the street as the lights began to come on. "You only gave it back," she said. "Some people spend their entire lives hoping for one very small thing, simply to have someone see them in the middle of a crowd. Kindness doesn't have to be grand. Sometimes it is only the right question asked at the right moment, or one hand holding another in a hallway at midnight. And the strange thing about kindness is that it always finds its way back, no matter how many years it has to travel around before returning." If this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this video so more people can hear it. How do you feel about the story of Adeline and Elias, and what part of their journey stayed with you the most? Please leave a comment below. We truly want to hear the feelings that come from deep within your heart. We wish everyone watching this video good health, happiness, and peace in every day of your life. Goodbye for now, and we hope to see you again in the next video.